All right. Thanks for the lovely welcome. First time in Greece. I've wanted to visit here many, many years, so I'm so glad that Costas and team invited me over. My name's Dave Anderson. I'm an architect, and I want to talk to you about accelerating towards serverless-first with the value flywheel effect. One of the things that I often hear about serverless is, when people talk about compute, is why serverless or what is serverless? People obsess about the technology. And it's the wrong question to ask as a technologist. It's really about when does the modernization start? What I see, I work with many, many companies. I see a lot of companies have made a migration to the cloud, and they're like, okay, we spent all that money, whatever's happened. Now, where's the faster time, the lower cost, the innovation, the transformation? Where did that go? We now have, it feels like we have a nicer data center now, but we don't have all the advantages. I always think that modernization is when the real work starts, when you're actually in the cloud. And for me, that's where the serverless mindset comes in, that you think in this way. So for myself, my kind of background, it started in this space around 2013. I was a kind of a CTO with Liberty Mutual in Ireland. I'm from Belfast in Ireland. And I was kind of at the table when Liberty Mutual, one of the largest insurance companies in the world, I think they're Fortune 75. And I was at the table when we started to speak to AWS as let's start a move to public cloud. And the thing I thought as a forever software person, what does that mean on how we write software? It'll obviously change a lot of things, but we need to create software differently. And we come up with this idea of serverless first, code is a liability. I don't want my engineers building all the time. Engineers want to build. We need to think different. We need to create capability to drive the business forward. And we started using phrases like code is a liability. The system is the asset. Let's create systems, not write code, to get the engineers to think differently. We wanted engineers to build well. Let's have high quality standards. Teams should have autonomy. And really that was the foundation of what I call the second transformation. And there was a nice case study written by AWS a few years ago that describes that journey. Currently, I'm with a company called GP Globalization Partners. It's an interesting company. It's US-based. It's a global remote-first company. And really what we do is quite straightforward. If you are a company here in Greece and you would like to hire somebody in another country, let's say Ireland, Vietnam, or Brazil, we have like almost 200 entities around the world. And what we do, it's called employer of record. We help you hire an individual in a different country. At the minute, you've got to set up an entity in a country. You've got to learn the compliance rules, learn everything. What we do is we do compliance, payroll, contracts, legal, benefits, pension. We do everything in that country. And that's across 200 countries all over the world. So it really makes it very easy to expand somewhere else. This is a brand new category. It was news to me before I started working with this company, but it's very exciting and really rapid growth. And there's a phrase called global growth technology. Is how do we help companies grow globally using technology? It's not just operations, it's we help you figure that out. And really what this means is we're building a well-architected, serverless-first, event-driven SaaS platform. That's what's kind of under the covers behind all this kind of this global system we're creating. As you can see, we're kind of market leaders in this new category, so it's a pretty exciting opportunity. And one of the things that I've done about 2 years ago, I started working on this book, and it was published this year by IT Revolution. That's by Gene Kim and Co. And really about, and this be called kind of a handbook for cloud modernization, by two co-authors, also worked at Liberty. We were part of that story at Liberty when we kind of made Liberty a serverless-first enterprise. And now we're kind of repeating that pattern again and again. And this is really what I'd say. It's the book is about how do you accelerate your journey towards the modern cloud. Not legacy cloud, we've just got a fancy data center. Modern cloud, we work differently. There's a nice foreword written by Adrian Cockcroft, who's the person who kind of brought Netflix to the cloud, and also Simon Wardley. One of the techniques I use extensively is Wardley Mapping, which helped me kind of figure a lot of this stuff out. And speaking of Wardley Mapping, anyone familiar with Wardley Mapping? Few people, cool. So this is a new type of this talk. So we'll see how this goes. One of the things that I think from a Wardley map, it's a nice way to, as Melissa really put it really well. A lot of people work small, but you need to think big. This is a way to think big. When you think of a key kind of stakeholder or kind of customer, think about what's the value chain of need, of things that they need. So the y-axis here is the value chain. Things towards the top are more visible to your stakeholder or your customer. Things toward the bottom are less visible. And across the bottom here, you've got the evolutionary axis. Every capability, technology, and component will evolve from left to right. So a lot of things will start on the left in Genesis, as this is brand new. We don't know anything about this. It's quite quite novel. Then moves into custom, where something is emerging. We start to understand it better. It moves across to product, where this is now good practice. We appreciate, we acknowledge this is a good thing to do. And then finally, something becomes commodity. It's just best practice. No one argues with that. Everything evolves from left to right. So one of the things that I'd often do is when I'm mapping out like a strategy, I would create a value chain, always start with a customer need, which in this case is maybe an executive stakeholder for your cloud transformation, your company. And maybe their prior need is time to value. So we want to go faster in an organization. For me, time to value depends on clarity of purpose. Teams need to understand what they're doing. They're really important. For teams to be in a safe space and have that psychological safety, you need to create an environment for success. To create that environment for success, you need enabling technology. What's the technology that will let your team work in that way? That depends on a problem prevention mindset. You don't want your teams firefighting. You want to give them time to focus on what they're trying to build. And that all relies on technical leadership. So one of the things that I'll walk through in this talk is how do we take these things and move them across? So how do we evolve these practices from left to right? And what are some of the mechanisms that you would use to do this? Again, this is what I kind of cover in the book in detail, so I'll kind of give a quick kind of coverage for this. Speaking of modernization, a lot of people say, well, what do you mean by modern? What does modernization in the cloud look like? And for me, there's some very simple principles that you can deliver on demand. Can your team deliver like tomorrow? It doesn't take like a month to get a release out. Can you evolve technology quickly? If ChatGPT comes in, can you integrate that into your stack very quickly? Is there commercial responsibility? Do your engineers talk about top-line growth? Is technology a cost center, or is it value creation? We don't go to the cloud to save money. We go to the cloud to drive our business forward, top-line growth. High-quality standards. You've got, from your testing, security, resiliency, performance, those things are all working really well. You have a very robust system. And then finally, independent teams. The teams build it, they run it, they own it. They know exactly what they need to do. They're not waiting on lots of handovers. They are the masters of their own destiny. They may be enabled by other teams, but they have everything they need. Things like serverless, DevOps, cloud, for me, they all lead to these same things. And then you've got platforms. You may use platforms. For me, platforms need to react in the same way as this. So this, to me, is modernization. It's really kind of throughput and pace. And that really brings us to the Value Flywheel, which is the model I kind of created when we did this modernization in Liberty. Spent kind of probably 10 years creating this. It's really a way to join the business and technology strategies. So that's those kind of 4 things you've got there. You have clarity of purpose. Does your team have a North Star? Challenge, create that environment of success. Next best action. Serverless-First gives you that technology sort of environment to move really quickly. And then long-term value with well-architected and sustainable technology goals. And Wardley Mapping, I use to kind of create perspective. So I'll try and illustrate this through the talk. And again, it's not about functions. I mean, I'm not going to stand here and talk about Lambda or, function as a service. It's about needing a map. It's finding out where you want to take a company from a technology perspective. So let's think the first mechanism. So clarity of purpose. How would we move clarity of purpose across? And one of the things that I find really useful for this is the North Star mechanism. So North Star, we often hear the phrase North Star. It's something that's used quite a lot. And for me, it's about engineers not building. They need to create business capability. They need to be very clear on what the capability or kind of what their software will make happen. Teams do need to be in charge of that and have the autonomy. And for me, it's about defining that North Star. Again, with the element of domain-driven design, teams own that entire picture. The mechanism I really like for this is called the North Star Framework. This was kind of created by Amplitude, and John Cutler has done a lot of work on kind of sharing this. What I would personally do, and what I would like architects to do, is sit with teams and work through this process with teams, with actual engineers and product managers. And I really like this kind of model because there's a nice kind of sequence to it. Number one there is a North Star metric. That's the actual metric, that's value. That's something that if you were to have a conversation with your CEO, they would understand that this is valuable. For Spotify, maybe it's number of minutes we listen to music. For Burger King, it's maybe number of burgers sold. It's something that is important to that business. It expresses value. Second, what's the long-term what's the medium and long-term impacts? What will it lead us to eventually? And then this is where you get into what the team do. Number three is input metrics. What are the things that we can do in the team that will advance this North Star? And then number four is the work of the projects or features or epics we're working on. Will that actually move the needle on any of these metrics? And you can see across the bottom, the things on the left are leading metrics, and on the right, it's lagging. I mean, actually, this is fairly basic kind of product-led thinking, but you'd be surprised the amount of teams that I work with, they have no idea what the North Star is. And then you try and do this exercise on Lucid or a whiteboard, and the first reaction is usually, well, the product manager could do that. That's their job. And as Melissa quite rightly pointed out, it's everyone's job to be on top of these metrics and be very clear what that North Star is. And one of the phrases that I can't stand is the fact that, oh, we're doing this for the business. It's like, we are the business. There is one company, and that's our own company. So the fact that, and I really sort of dislike this product, technology, kind of business silos. We're trying to recreate the silos of old. For me, teams need this ownership, that they do super clear on why they're doing what they're doing. One of the nice case studies from the book, it's a company called The Cloud Guru, who do a lot of cloud training. This was from a conference, I think it was in 2017. The founders were having a serverless conference, and they had Simon Wardley come and talk. And he did his talk, and the founders of A Cloud Guru were creating like the serverless community and doing lots of talks, doing lots of things. And they asked Simon about his mapping technique. And literally in a back room for the conference, he scribbled on a piece of paper. He says, right, who's your user? They were like a developer trying to learn the cloud. And they worked out a quick value chain. And he pretty much, within 10 minutes, he gave them a strategic analysis of what their company was doing and what they needed to focus on. That actually caused A Cloud Guru to pivot, focus on their user, and about 3 or 4 years later, they exited the company at something like a $2 billion evaluation when they sold it to Pluralsight. So it was just a really simple map to help clarify it, and they kindly shared that so I could use that in the book. So the next kind of mechanism for creating that environment of success is engineering excellence. I think this is so important to create a sort of environment of high engineering standards in a safe way. I mean, as we all know, remote work has completely changed the environment we work in. It's kind of completely blown apart a lot of the norms that we have. And one of the things that I find are constantly repeating to people, we're not just building a technology system, we're building a system which also includes teams and users and everything else. It's a socio-technical kind of view of what we're trying to do. It's not just about the code, and I'm always trying to remind that for teams. And one of the ways we kind of help teams do that is creating enabling constraints. When you start to put in some constraints that will actually drive the right behavior in teams. So as an example of some of those, these are some of the things that, again, I like to put in. The idea of team first, I think this is so important. I work with many different companies. I often hear people talk about teams as a collection of individuals. It's teams deliver software, not people. It's teams deliver software. So having a team first approach is absolutely critical. I'm a huge fan of team topologies. They optimize for faster flow. Vision, go back to the North Star. Teams need to understand what that vision is. One of the questions I always ask teams is, what's your North Star? And my answer, what I really want is a KPI. We're currently trying to increase user satisfaction, and we're currently at, I don't know, 35%. We're trying to get to 40%. That's kind of what I'm after. Autonomy. Once teams understand that vision, they need the correct environment that they can go down and chase that. Mastery, it's really important to set a high line for skills and help engineers learn, create that learning environment. As you probably notice, I'm very influenced by Dan Pink. So if you think of mastery, autonomy, and purpose, there's those three things. I would use the Dan Pink's kind of motivation, those three things to kind of drive how teams kind of structure themselves. Next, business domains. I think as serverless has kind of grown, serverless in the cloud has really become event-driven. You even see a lot of the big cloud providers are talking more about event-driven architecture. Again, for someone as old as myself, I remember the first time event-driven architecture came around in DDD. there's almost a resurgence. I think those two things sit very well together. And with the better understanding of DDD and the better technologies in cloud, we're starting to see some very interesting kind of developments. Actually breaking your problem down into business domains and having it's the Conway's law, having proper domains right the way through from team structure to software is really effective. And then finally, ways of working, as Melissa covered really well, a lot of times lesser optimized product management or bad agile practice can get in the way of good teams. So those are the things that I would think of decent enabling constraints. Again, to touch on team topologies, I think this is such an important book also by IT Revolution. They really think about, I would challenge leaders in the organization to say, what is the purpose of your different team? They say, such and such a team are great. What type of team is that? And one of the things I often get, well, they're a value team and they're doing a platform and they're also doing some enablement work. That's an instant smell. So actually looking at your teams with this lens really helps figure out the organization. At the minute in GP, one of the things that we're doing is we have a fully event-driven architecture, and we have used domain-driven design to structure our teams. I'll use the word domain. They're really bounded context, but simplify it to use domains. Each of these things is a domain, like country, customer, document, data, and they're all parts of different value streams. So this is actually pretty much like, it's simplified slightly, but this is effectively an org structure. Each team fully owns one of these domains, and each domain is a full AWS account with a full kind of workload running in that account. They're wholly responsible for that, including data, KPIs, service levels, everything. So that for me, and the way these domains interact is purely by event-driven. So you won't see any kind of point-to-point calls. When a customer is being created, they will just admit, I have created a customer who's interested. So actually building that structure in from the start and built on cloud-native technologies is a very interesting kind of place to prove out some of these techniques. Again, to do this, I think you need high-performing teams. And this is something, again, go back to the team first thing. Teams need to be right-sized. It's this idea of being comfortable with decentralization and the democratization. I talked about the guardrails and really that responsibility. I'm finding that this is a big shock for some developers who have come from enterprises where there's just all their job is to write code. Now you're giving them end-to-end ownership, and it's a challenge. One of the things I would often say to engineers, you're going to have a lot more responsibility. It's like and some engineers aren't ready for that, but it's really interesting to see the ones that have that growth mindset that actually want to work in this manner. Okay, so the next one is enabling technology. This is kind of, to me, one of the interesting ones, the serverless-first mechanism. And again, I think serverless probably is about 10 years old now, and it's a very misunderstood term. And one of the things I often talk about is a serverless-first mindset. It's not about using functions or lambdas or converting your microservices to lambdas. That's not what it is. It's really about using managed services over writing your own service. So if you think of this, and I often think of it as an operational construct, if you think of this kind of spectrum, things on the left here have more operations, like standing up a virtual machine, installing your own database, maybe using something like a MySQL, having your own kind of storage or eventing system. That's things on the left that I would say are traditional. Things on the right, like S3, Dynamo, Lambda, again, they're AWS services, but they're similar on Azure and Google. Things you can basically have an API and have a capability behind that for events, storage, or compute. That's kind of, and these are getting more advanced. You have things like step functions that will orchestrate workflows, Event Bridge that will do your kind of your eventing backbone. These are all capabilities as a team you don't need to build. Like some people are standing up their own Kafka structures or systems. You don't need to stand up and host Kafka. You can use a managed service to do that for you. Again, offload the operational burden to your cloud provider. That's why we're going to the cloud, so we don't have to do this. That gives you faster iterations. You get scalability out of the box. It's usually cheaper in the long run. And again, it's simpler. And I think it's much more agile. If you want to try one of these services, it's easy to bring it in. If it's not working, you can pivot to something else. For me, that's that serverless-first mindset. Still something that's quite controversial. Containers are not a bad thing, but I always say to teams, start with a serverless service, and then if you need to fall back, then do so. There's one or two scenarios when you might fall back, but there's not as many as you think. And again, serverless leads quite nicely to event-driven. And for me, what I see teams writing is single-purpose functions, like do one thing and do one thing well. You have a completely isolated environment. You have async, which is scales. You have ephemeral infrastructure. You can stand things up, run your workloads, and tear them back down again. Using something like Backstage as an internal developer portal will aggregate all of your developer kind of templates, your login, your system in one place. And then you can have full system observability. Things like OpenTelemetry are coming in now, which make observability a lot easier. These are the types of things that I would say they're probably next level capabilities you get to. So that sounds great, but it's not easy, it's difficult. You do need to unlearn a lot of what I would say old muscle memory. If you've been working in the industry for a long time, there's good practices you learned when you were younger that now you have to almost flip. A good one is I often hear is shared libraries. When I was younger, shared libraries were the best thing. We'll write a shared library, it'll be reusable, that'll be fantastic. In this distributed environment, shared libraries actually slow you down because they create dependencies. Running locally is very difficult, if not impossible. You have to think very different about the testing. The testing pyramid is almost flipped on its end. It's more like an ice cream cone. And you have to think of behavior-driven as opposed to test-driven. So I would say it's a very advanced way of verification. So one of the things that I think about is, if you think of your team topologies lens, with some of the teams I work with, what do they actually do? So if you think of 3 types of teams: value, enablement, and platform. So the value team is the team actually building the domain. So what I'd be quite strict about is I'd like them to build in Lambda, Dynamo, API Gateway, and Event Bridge. That's their core building blocks. It's pretty straightforward. They're all serverless managed services. I want the team to focus on event, API, or domain design. Think about what that domain does and what it shouldn't do, and what's the responsibility of that domain. Think about the design of your events. Think of the business capability. How can you extend that domain to improve and to create more capability and more value? And then you'll have to own this workload. So you have to be comfortable with runbooks, with security threats, with all the other things you need to be responsible for. We also have enablement teams, which could be like an architecture team. I would consider myself as part of the architecture team as an enablement function. I help the teams with well-architected, help with her performance, cost, security. We have maybe some QA or software engineers and test that help with advanced kind of maybe exploratory testing, some verification techniques. And we have cloud engineers that will help with infrastructure, maybe set up the complex networking. So the things in the green are maybe staff at our company that are helping the value teams. And then the platform teams. For me, this is the interesting one. Platform teams help maybe with reporting, observability, with dashboarding, heuristics and compliance, maybe informing you when you're out of compliance, maybe from a security perspective. Global availability, networking, compute, storage, security. I would like to push as much of that as possible to the cloud provider. So people often talk about setting up a platform team. We'll build a platform to do this. Why not just use Google, Microsoft, or AWS? That's what they do very well. So I prefer the orange piece here to be effectively completely offloaded to the cloud provider, and that frees our valuable engineers to do the stuff at the top, which is for our business. I recently got challenged by one of our cloud engineers, why don't we just not use Kubernetes and just do all the orange stuff ourselves? And the reason being that I would like to have a cloud team of 12 people, not 1,000 people doing that. So it's really about a scale thing. I want to move faster, creating business capability, and not worry about what I would say is for what we do in our company. I don't want to be building undifferentiated functions. I think there's something nice. I see a change in the industry. People are starting to talk about, Dave Farley had a book out recently called Modern Software Engineering. He's talking about it's almost like XP evolved to what we do today. And for me, this is like, I need engineers to be really solid with their cloud principles, including leaders. I think system designers becoming really important, the event-driven architecture. I need engineers to be commercial thinkers, to think about the actual business and not get stuck in the code base. You'd be really smart with learning, teaming, and inter-teaming, how we interact with other teams. And so that's some of the rapid feedback loops. I mean, you'll probably see that pattern repeating through the talks today. But for me, it's a very different way and different expectation for software engineers from maybe even 10 years ago. I would highly recommend this book, by the way. Again, what I would describe it as engineers with high agency and low barriers. Your engineers can move incredibly fast. And again, as Adrian Croft says, when you create these types of engineers and teams, the best thing to do is just get out of their way because they can go faster than anything else. So you're probably thinking then, well, what do the architects do? That's interesting. I don't like the fact that architects that are in coding with the teams, they should code, but they're not part of the teams because they can maybe help troubleshoot. They're not doing the design for the teams. What I find myself doing is I will help teams with event storming. I'll help them with try and figure out how they're going to design the systems. I'll help them with North Star workshops, help facilitate their North Star sessions. We'll actually get into some of the details about the event-driven architecture. There's some interesting kind of integration patterns when you're building these type of async systems. And then even example mapping, help teams figure out what they want to build. And really, as an architect, my job is to think about what we're going to build in a year's time. So I need to strategically look down the road and let the teams worry about execution in this quarter. So that's kind of, I would say, I'm not sure if that's common, but the phrase I would use, you're an enabling architect, you're enabling the teams. Okay, so related to kind of architecture, the next mechanism is a problem prevention mindset. And for me, I use well-architected. Well-architected is a framework that some of the cloud providers have brought out over the past few years. But for me, the purpose is with problem prevention, I want engineers to eradicate problems before they happen. It's the opposite of the hero developer who answers a call on Saturday night, works all night Saturday, all day Sunday to bring the system back up. That's not good behavior. We don't want that behavior because that means we've missed something earlier on the cycle. In an environment of continuous compliance, what you start to think about, how do we know these things work? There's constant deployments. How can we, like the yearly audit doesn't work. So we want to give developers the freedom to deploy multiple times a day, detect issues in the environment, in the cloud environment, auto-remediate. If there's an open port being caused by a deployment or an open API, I would like the cloud infrastructure to shut that down, and then we inform the developers this has been shut down. For me, that's the latest and greatest AWS practices, and again, goes back to the reduced operational burden. Complete automation for compliance. And the way we use this is, this is the AWS well-architected framework. And often the big cloud providers, all three have this framework. They're pretty much the same, but they're slightly different the way they phrase them. And a lot of people think well-architected is like an audit. If you're doing something big, you get the cloud provider to audit your system, and you get a certificate of approval. Whatever, you can do that, but for me, I like to use this as a practice. Every sprint, every 2-week sprints, I want teams doing this. And when I call that SCORP, and SCORP stands for security, cost, operational excellence, reliability, performance. I want the teams to capture key metrics, KPIs, non-functional KPIs and those things, and continuously improve them. It's a continuous improvement mechanism. But I want teams thinking, the cost of this is just sneaked up in test. I think I want to change that. We've done a threat model, we found a vulnerability. There's a remediation we need to put in. We've done some chaos testing, and we see that certain thing happens when something is switched off. I want the teams to catch that in dev and test environments, so when they get to production, they're rock solid. And again, every single sprint, we go through this. This is a mindset, not an architect's chore. And now, people often say, like, serverless is fine, but it doesn't really scale, or maybe traditional companies can't use that. It's only for startups. What I'm seeing is a lot of very large companies are using serverless technologies. I was really pleased a few years ago. I came across the BBC in England, have their BBC News website, which is it's been around for ages, one of the early kind of, they're quite pioneering, lots of different languages, channels, etc. Very complicated publishing effort. They decided to re-architect the core of that system in serverless. And I did a case study for this in the actual book, which is super interesting. And the lead architect, I spent lots of time with him. And he said that when something happens, like there's a big story with the royal family, there's been quite a few recently, that the entire world has bbc.co.uk to find out what's happening. So they get massive spikes. And if it's something like a death or something like that, they can't plan when that happens. It's different if it's a wedding, but if it's something they're unexpected, they'll just get demand before they know it. So they've, in their system, they're constantly releasing. They release several times a day. They're servicing billions and billions of requests. They're numbers are just eye-watering, and that's probably from 18 months ago, so they're probably a lot higher now. So I thought it was fascinating to see an old company like BBC use serverless on one of the most complicated and important kind of technologies. And again, there's more of that in the book. So the last mechanism is kind of Wardley Mapping. And this, for me, is the technical leadership. I think this is one of the most important things. One of the things that I was involved in as I started doing more mapping, and I know Simon Wardley started creating these research groups to kind of think about, in 10 years' time, what will the world be like? So we kind of did this study in 2021 to think, what will it be like in 2031? What will companies be like? And I know Costas here was part of that research group as well. I think there was around 60 people from all over the world, analysed, I think it was 12 different industries, and we spent 6 months analysing the industry and pulling together all the trends and mapping them out and trying to spot trends. And we pulled all that research together and created this kind of traditional next generation. And you can see here there's things like, I'll focus on next generation, remote first, leaderless leadership, principles guiding people, non-hierarchical structure, systemic awareness, outcome driven, using kind of external validation. Again, just this, it's really a growth mindset. I thought that was a fascinating study that kind of paints a nice picture of some of the stuff I'm talking about. I would actually recommend looking up that report. It's free to download if you just search for Wardley on industrialization. It's a brilliant report. It's very long as well. But for me, the thing is, Wardley Mapping, it helps create focus as an engineer. You can sit back and think way ahead, and what are the moves we need to make at some point in the future. So when you think about that's our kind of map, and what I would often do, that's a fairly simplistic map, but you can see that through some of those mechanisms, we've moved stuff across. That's your kind of modernization journey. So you're probably thinking, what now? Our time to value is fast. What really gets interesting is once you start doing that mapping, it opens up future capability. So when you're executive stakeholder, once you have things going fast, it's what next? So for your company, what is the future capability? If you could deliver like at a moment's notice, and you could move faster than product management, what's the new thing you would build? For every company, that's different. You don't want to be of a fixed mindset, caught that we can't build anything because we're slow. Just flip to say, no, we're really fast, we can build anything we want. What's the future capability? It's a real kind of growth mindset thing. That's really what you're locking up when you do the modernization. But again, that's often difficult for people to kind of realize. And that's what we kind of cover in the value flywheel. It's a flywheel for a reason. Once you start working this way, you get faster and faster and faster, and you start to remove inertia, remove blockers, common vocabulary. So it's really about, here's some of the mechanisms that really help that different way of thinking. It's not just about serverless, it's about that whole picture together. I think each of these components are equally important. So that's me. Like I say, the book was out at the start of the year. Really well received. We blog on the serverless-age.com where we kind of talk about some of these things, and we have like Melissa, we have a podcast that we don't take very seriously called Serverless Crack. Crack is like an Irish word for good fun. We just talk about these concepts. So I definitely have a look at the book. Like, I think this is a fascinating area. I see changes in lots of companies, from startups to scale-ups to enterprises to SMBs. There's a lot of demand. How do we work differently? You don't need thousands of people to do this. You just need the right mindset. And for me, that's about creating that value flywheel effect and thinking differently about how you build. Okay, that's me. Thank you.